On the 25th of December 1956, a baby was born in a hospital in Germany. With the Second World War more than a decade in the past, this baby's future should have been a relatively bright one. But there was a problem. The baby was born without ears. An unexpected birth defect that was, ultimately, the very first of many thousands to be caused by one of the worst medical scandals of all time. The drug thalidomide was first synthesized by Chiba, a Swiss chemical manufacturer which intended to develop it as a tranquilizer. Research on the drug was abandoned in 1954 after it was found to have no noticeable effect on animals. In 1957, this apparently useless drug was acquired for further research by a German company, Chemie Grünenthal. Grünenthal was a company with a complicated past. It had been founded as a soap manufacturer after the end of the Second World War by Hermann Wirtz Sr., a man who had been part of the Nazi Party during the war. While many prominent Nazis were put on trial and sentenced for the war crimes they had carried out or enabled during the years of conflict, there were so many people involved in the complicated structure of the Nazi Party that many also escaped prosecution. Hermann Wirtz Sr. was one of these, and he hired to work with him a number of people in a similar position. Chemist Heinrich Muchter had carried out experiments on prisoners in concentration camps. Martin Stemmler had been a vocal supporter of Nazi eugenics. Heinz Baumkotter had been a senior medical officer at a concentration camp. All were now hired to work for Grünenthal. And when their new wonder drug thalidomide became popular, many became very wealthy off the resultant sales. Thalidomide was initially marketed as an effective treatment for general complaints such as colds, coughs, headaches, and insomnia. Sold over the counter under the trade name Contagon in Germany, it soon gained popularity, and at one point sales of the drug rivaled those of the long-established painkiller aspirin. Before long, it was noticed that thalidomide also had the benefit of diminishing nausea. Grünenthal began marketing it to pregnant women, with the promise that it would help alleviate morning sickness. Thalidomide was not actually tested on pregnant women before being offered to them, as at the time, most doctors did not believe that medication taken by a pregnant woman could have any effect on the developing fetus. Thalidomide did indeed drastically improve the symptoms of morning sickness. It was so effective that it spread quickly around the world. In the UK, thalidomide was distributed under the brand name Distaval from 1958. It was a commonly used drug across Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. Thalidomide never made it to the United States, however. The Food and Drug Administration in the US did not approve it for sale, despite significant pressure from pharmaceutical companies who wished to bring it to market. Francis Oldham Kelsey, the FDA reviewer who refused to approve thalidomide, had to go to considerable lengths to do so. At the time, the FDA could only withhold approval for 60 days at once, and so Francis spent more than a year requesting further information from the distributor every 60 days to prevent thalidomide from getting through the system. She was later given the President's Award for Distinguished Federal Civilian Service for her work. While the FDA successfully kept thalidomide from being sold in the US, more than 1 million samples of thalidomide were distributed to US doctors as part of a clinical trial. And so some patients in the US did, unfortunately, end up being exposed to the drug. East Germany, separated from the rest of the country by the Berlin Wall, also rejected thalidomide, and as such remained one of the few European countries where it simply was not available at all. Doctors around the world were initially perfectly content to distribute thalidomide. There was a belief that the drug was perfectly safe, as harmless as a sugar cookie, as some adverts for it claimed. It had been tested on animals, and these tests had found that it was almost impossible to give a lethal dose. With respect to the possibility of overdosing, then, It was even considered safer than many other medications. The first baby to be affected by thalidomide was born to an employee of Grünenthal on Christmas Day 1956. The baby was born without ears, a birth defect that wasn't initially linked to the fact that the mother had taken thalidomide to alleviate morning sickness during her pregnancy. In the years that followed, tens of thousands more babies would be born with similar and more serious birth defects as a result of thalidomide. Just one dose was enough to produce serious birth defects, and the drug would affect different parts of the body depending on when in the course of a pregnancy it was taken. If taken 43 or more days into pregnancy, effects would be minimal or non-existent. But it could cause brain damage if taken on the 20th day of pregnancy, eye damage if taken on the 21st day, damage to the ears if taken on the 22nd day, and damage to the limbs if taken on the 24th to the 28th day of pregnancy. Babies affected by thalidomide would often be born with one or more severe deformities. These could include phocomelia, or the severe shortening and deformation of limbs. Facial features, the genitals, and internal organs could also be severely affected. Around 40% of affected babies died during or shortly after birth. Many affected babies did, however, survive. In some cases, the damage caused by thalidomide would drastically shorten their life expectancy, and in almost all cases it would make the tasks of day-to-day living vastly more difficult. Prosthetics that were available at the time were, by modern standards, quite rudimentary, but they did enable many survivors some degree of extra mobility. Learning to use them, however, was often a difficult, lengthy, and extremely uncomfortable process. At the time, also, those affected by thalidomide often faced stigma. Children would sometimes be abandoned by families who felt unable to cope with their condition, and would thus be raised in institutional settings. Towards the end of the 1950s, doctors around the world noticed a sharp increase in the number of birth defects they were seeing in their patients. In many cases, however, the limb differences observed in newborns resembled limb differences that could be attributed to genetic conditions. As such, several years passed before thalidomide was suspected. In 1961, Australian doctor William McBride, having been alerted by the concerns of his midwife colleague Pat Sparrow, wrote to the Lancet Medical Journal with concerns about thalidomide. His letter was just 5 sentences long, but the final sentence contained a vital question. Have any of your readers seen similar abnormalities in babies delivered of women who have taken this drug during pregnancy? It was sufficient to prompt further research from doctors in Europe. Within months, the link between thalidomide and the rise in abnormal births was considered proven. Grünenthal quickly removed the drug from sale, and distributors in other countries followed suit. Spain was one of the last countries to do this, with thalidomide available there until the early 1970s. Spain aside, in most countries where the drug had been used, it had been available for just a few years, 1957 to 1961. In that time, however, it may have affected as many as 20,000 births worldwide. In 1968, Grünenthal was taken to court, charged with causing injury and negligent homicide. The trial went on for 2 years before the company agreed to settle out of court in 1970. Because of this, no individual person was ever determined to be responsible for the scandal. Grünenthal contributed towards a fund for people affected by thalidomide, as did the German government. Survivors in Germany were awarded a one-off payout and a small weekly stipend as compensation for their injuries. Many people harmed by thalidomide are still alive today. Despite the significant difficulties they face, they have often gone on to live full lives and achieve great things. Thalidomide survivor Matt Fraser became a successful musician and artist. Josie Lake, a Canadian thalidomide survivor, won gold at the Paralympic Games. British thalidomide survivor Lorraine Mercer carried the Olympic torch in 2012, and later was awarded an MBE for her work at a local hospital. Thomas Quastoff was a successful classical singer, despite being rejected from music school due to his inability to play the piano. Many thalidomide survivors have gone on to work, make art, be active parts of their communities, raise families, and campaign for causes that are important to them. Indeed, many campaigns for compensation for those affected by thalidomide have been organised by survivors. In the UK, the Thalidomide Trust was set up in 1973 and won £28 million in compensation from the British distributor, a sum that was later bolstered by £20 million from the UK government in 2009. An apology was also given in Parliament later that same year. Around the world, the thalidomide scandal caused huge changes to be made to the ways in which new drugs were tested and approved. No longer would the results of animal trials be considered sufficient in and of themselves to approve a drug for use in humans. Doctors everywhere took a renewed interest in the side effects of drugs, and particularly how some drugs can pass across the placental barrier from mother to child in pregnant women. It is now recognized that, with any new drug, users must not only be monitored whilst taking it, but followed up with long after they have done so. Thalidomide was out of use for many years, but was not altogether abandoned. Versions of the drug are now used to treat complications arising from leprosy, as well as a range of other serious health conditions. Understandably, due to the drug's complicated past, it is treated with extreme caution. Steps are taken to ensure that those to whom it is prescribed are not pregnant, and will not become pregnant while taking thalidomide. In 2012, a time when, even decades on from the thalidomide scandal, thousands of people still live with the consequences, Grünenthal, now under new leadership and thoroughly divorced from its origins, finally issued an apology. The chief executive said, "We ask for forgiveness that for nearly 50 years we didn't find a way of reaching out to you from human being to human being. We ask that you regard our long silence as a sign of the shock that your fate caused in us. We wish that the thalidomide tragedy had never happened. We see both the physical hardship and the emotional stress that the affected, their families, and particularly their mothers, had to suffer because of thalidomide, and still have to endure day by day."